Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close-Up, Asa Hutchinson back in Iowa just 2 weeks after jumping into the presidential race. Why he says former President Trump should consider dropping out. And South Carolina Senator Tim Scott one step closer to a run of his own. What he says sets him apart from the other candidates in the race. And a big other caucus curveball, the bill at the State House that could scuttle Iowa Democrats' plans to keep their first-in-the-nation status.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning and welcome to Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. Well, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson back in the Hawkeye State last week, but this time as an official candidate for president. We asked Hutchinson how his stance on abortion could impact his run for the White House and why he's the only candidate to call for Donald Trump to drop out of the race.
Obviously, I'm pro-life, and that will be an important issue for many people. You know, some of them because they're anti-abortion, some because they're very pro-life. And so it's important for a candidate to state your conviction, explain that, and then the decisions will be made partly on that, but I think that the other issues are going to be critically important. It's still the economy. It's still the strength of our military and how we're going to approach and counter China and their aggressiveness. So I don't see that as an issue that's going to hurt us long term. I think there's a couple important things. Arkansas has a strict pro-life law, but if you believe in the state's prerogative, which the Dobbs decision gave us, then each state's going to make their decision as to how they're going to approach that, which is the right way under our system of federalism.
The GOP is getting full of candidates coming out and announcing. How do you set yourself apart from somebody like Nikki Haley? And you talked some about being a nominee and winning the nomination for independent voters and being a stronger candidate. How do you set yourself apart?
Well, I mean, these are my friends, and so whoever you're talking about that's running, I've served with many of them. I have a high regard for them, and so we're all running for the same position. There's probably some differences, and those differences will develop as time goes on. But a decision of the voters is basically, who do I trust to lead this country? Who do I have confidence in to make the tough decisions? And that the fabric of how they make that decision is based upon some issues, but it's also based upon them looking you in the eye and the sense that they have of you. And so I want people to get to know me. I've got a different background than just about everybody else. Everybody's got a unique story, and I have a unique part of the American story. And I want people to get to know that, and I think whenever they see that, they'll say, this is someone that's not only got a consistent conservative record, has got an optimistic view of our future as a country, as a person of conviction, but he's also lived a lot of the life experiences that the average Iowan has. And I think when that happens, I'm pretty optimistic that they will identify with my leadership.
You had mentioned the former President Donald Trump, who's running for a third time, and the importance of moving on from Donald Trump for the Republican nominee in 2024. One of the questions you did not get asked in there that we're hearing candidates be asked is about election integrity. How would you answer the question where people are denying the results of the 2020 election still?
Well, first of all, it is interesting that as I come here, I mean, I'm not getting asked about what's your view of Donald Trump. Sometimes I volunteer it, but that's not a question on the forefront of people's minds. It's more, what are you doing about the economy, and what are you doing about high cost of gasoline? But in terms of the Trump factor that you mentioned, I think you've just got to be clear that we can't win with him. And I think every candidate has to articulate it in their own way, but I don't think it's a little bit unusual. Usually you try not to mention other candidates, but I think in this instance, with all that's happening, you have to be clear that Trump is not the right one to lead our party or our country in the future. And the reasons are very clear to me. When you're talking about his engagement in the last election and believing that he won, he's wrong. He lost that election. He lost in 2020. But it is important to have election integrity. We have voter ID in Arkansas. Every state controls that, and that's important. We want to make sure that we have a system that you can have confidence in, that when the votes are cast, they're counted, and that in our democracy, we showcase to the world that we're going to have a peaceful transfer of power, and we know how to count votes, and we know how to count them with integrity, and that's up to each individual state to make sure that happens.
You may kind of talk over yourself on the same point, but in your announcement interview, you said that Donald Trump should drop out of the race following the indictment. Why take such a bold stance?
Because I don't think you should be uncertain about that. I think you need to be clear that Donald Trump is not the right one to lead our country or our party, and we'll lose if that happens. And sure, we want to reach out to all of the voters that are out there across the board, but this is a critical decision for us coming up. And I think candidates make a mistake if they miss that opportunity to distinguish themselves. And so, yes, I said that he should drop out of the race. I know he's not going to, and ultimately this should be decided at the ballot box. It will be decided at the ballot box and not in the courtroom. I've always viewed the office of the presidency more important than any individual person. And if you have that view on it, then you're not going to let the distractions of criminal investigations and indictments harm our country and our future and the ability to conduct a good election. But obviously we're going to have that. It's going to be decided at the ballot box, and we're ready to go to show the differences.
And Asa Hutchinson officially in the race, but he says he'll formally kick off his presidential run April 26th in Arkansas. Well, still to come on Close Up, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, one step closer to making his presidential campaign official, what he says he has to offer Iowa Republicans. And a major caucus curveball, why Iowa Republicans argue Iowa Democrats' plans could sink both parties' first in the nation status. Well, another Republican is one step closer to jumping into the presidential race. Last week, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott launched a presidential exploratory committee that allows Scott to raise campaign money that would go towards a run for the White House. Scott made that announcement just before visiting Cedar Rapids, and although he is not officially committed to a run, he told CBS's Caitlin Huey-Burns he does plan on being the Republican nominee in 2024. He also tells her how he hopes to win over Iowa Republicans in the race for president.
So I'm going to spend my time investing in solutions for the American people.
But clearly, by announcing your interest in running for the presidency,
yes,
you see an opening. Even though Trump has a sizable portion of the base, you see an opening in the Republican Party.
Yeah, I see that America is starving for positive, optimistic leadership. I want to provide that alternative, not to any specific candidate, but for the American people. I think, Galen, the difference between me and others, I believe, is that my focus is on the fact that I used to be a kid who didn't see a future. I used to be a kid that was angry about the cards I was dealt. I was blessed by a mother who never surrendered. I was blessed by a mentor who always loved and supported my ideal self. And it's because of those two individuals that I now have greater faith in the future for others. And I see my responsibility of sharing the good news of who we can be, because we have been. If we can unite this country around the solutions, focusing more on those solutions than anything else, it's my only path forward. And it's the one I've chosen.
I want to ask you about your stance on whether the federal government should be involved in regulating abortion. Your colleague from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, has a bill to limit abortions at 15 weeks, federal restriction. Do you support that measure?
Yeah, so I would say this, that I am certainly 100% pro-life, without any question. I've been very, very clear about that, very consistent about that. I do think we spend not enough time understanding how far the far left has gone on the issue of abortion. The Senate Democrats have voted for late-term abortions well into the third trimester, some even suggesting that we should have abortion up until the day of birth. The fact that we are one of a handful of countries that allows for late-term abortions is a challenging predicament for us to be in.
But in order to solve that, do you think the federal government should be involved with something like what Lindsey Graham is proposing?
Yeah, there's no question that we're going to have lots of folks talk about legislation from a federal perspective, but what I've heard so far and what I've seen in the Senate aren't proposals, but votes from the left trying to figure out how to continue their campaign towards late-term abortions, even allowing abortions based on the gender of the child or the race of the child or the disabilities of the child.
But as president, if you were president, would you advocate for federal limits?
Yeah. So once again, I'm 100% pro-life, and I do believe that. No, that's not what I said. I do believe that we should have a robust conversation about what's happening on a very important topic. There's no doubt that when I'm sitting in a banking hearing, having a conversation about financial issues, and you have the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, talking about young, poor African American women having abortions to increase their labor force participation rate, I was stunned into silence. So while the underlying issue is so incredibly important, how we solve that problem is by getting everybody to the table and having that conversation.
Quick question about Joe Biden, because you've mentioned him a few times.
Certainly.
Do you think that he is physically and mentally up for the job?
Well, I think that he has been a poor leader for America. The question to me is it physical or mental? I think he's just not been a very good president. You look at the inflationary impact that is happening to everyday Americans today under his watch. He infused $4 trillion into our economy, starting with the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package that only missed COVID relief 1% for vaccines, 9% for COVID-related health care. That set our inflationary economy on fire. That led to, I think it's 10 increases by the Fed to cool down the economy. So his leadership has imperiled single mothers like the one that raised me, as well as senior citizens on fixed incomes. I look at this Department of Education that has made it a war against charter schools in this country that provide a real path out of poverty for so many kids. So his leadership failures, I believe, is based on his incompetence, not on his mental acuity or his physical capabilities.
And just one final question.
Yes,
if
ma'am.
Donald Trump is the nominee for the Republican Party, would you support him?
I plan on being the nominee. Obviously, I have an exploratory committee moving forward.
But if Trump is the nominee, would you support him?
Obviously, I'm looking forward to being the nominee as I'm working on my own exploratory committee.
Well, Scott Thayer left Iowa Wednesday and he headed to New Hampshire, the first in the nation primary state. The South Carolina senator has not said when he will officially announce whether he's officially running for president. Another candidate, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, also in Iowa last week. Still to come on Close Up, what she told voters when they asked her on abortion and on school choice. and a bill that would stop Iowa Democrats' plans for mail-in caucusing in 2024. Why Republicans say without that ban, the Iowa GOP could lose its first-in-the-nation status. Welcome back to Close Up. Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley made her third swing through the Hawkeye State last week. That included her first Women for Nikki town hall in Des Moines last Wednesday. She fielded several questions from the crowd, including how she'd handle abortion and her thoughts on school choice.
One thing I'm curious about is abortion. I am definitely pro-life, but after the last set of midterms, it is obviously a really big deal. What are your thoughts on that? And I'd love to hear that.
I am strongly pro-life, but I'm not pro-life because the Republican Party tells me to be. I'm pro-life because my husband was adopted, and I live with that blessing every day. I'm pro-life because I had trouble having both of my children, and I know every time I see them, I see the blessings that they are. Having said that, I don't judge anyone that's pro-choice any more than I want them to judge me being pro-life. What I think is this is a personal issue for women and for men, and it needs to be treated with the respect that it should. I don't want unelected justices deciding something this personal. I want to make sure that it's decided where the people's voices are heard. And what we need to do is do it in a way that we can find consensus. What is that consensus? We know that we don't agree with what Congress tried to pass, which is abortion up until the time of birth. We don't agree with that, right? We don't agree that doctors and nurses who are pro-life should have to perform abortions, right? We agree that we need to support as many women and mothers as we can and encourage adoption, right? And then we also agree that we're not going to let this be a political football. Let's let the states work this out.
Talk about choice of school. When I hear choice of school, I think public schools then are going to suffer because choices are going to go to private schools. And so what would you do to reinforce to parents that what their real role is in education? And wait a second, by the way, I did teach sex ed. I was a health teacher. So
What grade did you teach?
I taught sophomores, and let me tell you,
10th grade, right?
I could tell you stories.
Yes. First of all, God bless you for being a teacher. My mom was a 6th grade teacher. My future son-in-law is an elementary school teacher. So I feel like we have to, when we talk about education, we have to make sure we're talking about what we're focused on. The angst that we have with education are with the school bureaucrats, right? Not with the teachers. Having said that, parents need to be able to see everything that's happening in the classroom. We have one job, and that's to make sure we get our kids right. Teachers have been given way too much. They expect them to be the teacher, the parent, the guidance counselor, the nurse, the pastor, everything else. It's too much. If you're hiring them to teach, let them do their job. That's the next thing. Then we need to look at the fact, how do you bring parents in? The way we did it in South Carolina, we have a lot of rural challenged areas. When it was that we saw a child couldn't read by 3rd grade, that's why we brought the parents in. That's why we did reading remediation with the parents, because they needed to know there was a responsibility there. But I will say, I don't care the education level of a parent. I don't care the income level of a parent. I don't care any of the background information of the parent. They know best what their child needs. I truly believe that. And if they see that that child doesn't fit in a public school education, and they see that there's a school that can better tailor to them, they should have the right to do that. We saw after COVID, the number of homeschoolers multiplied times 5 in this country. The majority of them, African American. They didn't have a place to go. They couldn't afford the private schools. So we've got to make sure we do allow for charter schools. Now, everybody worries what's going to happen to the public schools. I grew up in my parents' business. My mom used to always say the best thing that could happen to us is if our competition put in a place right across the street, because it would make us treat our customer better, it would make us give better service, and competition raises all ships. It has to be. Public schools can't be immune to that competition. Public schools should want to be so good that nobody wants their child to go to another school.
Still to come on Close Up, Iowa Democrats say they were caught by surprise when House Republicans moved a bill to ban mail-in caucusing. Why Republicans say that bill will save Iowa's first-in-the-nation status, while Democrats call it a political attack. State House Republicans introduced a bill last week that would require Iowa's caucuses to be entirely in person. Iowa Democrats had pitched a new mail-in process for 2024 that would be banned under the bill. The bill passed the House Ways and Means Committee Thursday. Republicans say that bill is necessary to keep Iowa a caucus and not a primary, and make sure New Hampshire does not jump ahead of Iowa. Now, the New Hampshire Secretary of State sent out an email last week saying they view any change in Iowa's caucuses, like using mail-in or absentee ballots, as too similar to a primary. They say those changes would trigger their state law, forcing them to move their primary to go before Iowa. Now, Iowa Republican Party Chair Jeff Kaufman says unless state lawmakers pass a bill to require in-person caucus participation, New Hampshire will jump and Iowa would lose its top spot in the 2024 election and beyond.
And so the Iowa being first in the nation in caucuses and New Hampshire being first in the nation in primaries has dependent on the two of us standing together, making agreements in both parties and standing together. The 10 years I've been chair, we meet regularly, our carve-out states in the GOP, and I know the Democrats have as well. And we just reinforce that we sink or swim together. There were times when Nevada has been enticed. South Carolina has been enticed by national parties to change things up and to move away from our carve-out system. And every single time they told us no, because they know when we disrupt that system, we lose it all. And once we lose it, we won't get it back again. This is not just a 2024 issue. This is an issue for how we start the presidential nominating process for good. So our carve-out system is anchored by this Iowa, New Hampshire.
Iowa Democrats on the other side are pushing back on all of this. They call concerns from Republicans and New Hampshire political and premature. Iowa Democratic Party Chair Rita Hart says Democrats have not decided how and when they hold their caucuses, but they say they will move forward with a mail-in component. They do not view that as a primary, and they say they'll move forward with that regardless of a new law or threats from New Hampshire.
Democrats are in the process of finalizing our next step for our caucuses. We're still working on our delegate selection plan, which has not been shared with anyone. No new proposals on this plan have been made in a year's time. This legislation that was recently dropped and this concern raised by Republicans and the concern by New Hampshire, I believe is extremely premature. As I continue to meet with folks across our state, I can tell you that Iowa Democrats are very excited about our new mail-in process, which will allow more people to participate than ever before. We will now have the ability to hear from a police officer or a firefighter that's working a third shift, from a single parent who may not have access to childcare, or from those in the disability community who will be unable to leave their homes. As chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, I'm committed to doing what's best for Iowa, not what's best for New Hampshire. And if Iowa Republicans are serious about defending Iowa, and I believe that they are serious about that, they won't let another state weigh in on the laws that we write, and they would give me an opportunity to work with them, to work together with them on behalf of Iowans.
Iowa Democrats have asked the Democratic National Committee for more time to finalize when and how they'll hold their caucuses. They're now asking for a 30-day extension, which would give them until June 3rd to submit an official plan. Iowa Democrats say House Republicans' new bill would have a, quote, dramatic effect on their caucus plans if signed into law. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close-Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Have a great day.